Friday nights at Romano's family restaurant had always been about peace, safety, and the quiet routines of a father and daughter. But that night, everything changed. Three men in expensive suits cornered Rebecca Martinez, a lawyer who carried dangerous secrets, and the entire diner froze. Ryan Carter, a single dad trying to live quietly as a plumber, had promised his 8-year-old daughter Zoe a normal life. But when Zoe whispered, "Daddy, that lady looks scared," he could no longer stay hidden. In just 15 seconds, Ryan revealed the precision and strength of his Navy SEAL past, dismantling all three men and shocking the room into silence. What no one expected was the truth that followed. Rebecca was the daughter of Captain Benjamin Rodriguez, Ryan's fallen commanding officer, and the same corrupt defense contractor that once betrayed soldiers was now hunting her. What began in a diner was only the beginning. The courthouse victory over Victor Castellanos should have brought closure. Ryan Carter had watched the man led away in handcuffs, the evidence stacked so high that even his wealth and influence couldn't shield him. Justice had been served, or at least that's what the headlines proclaimed. But headlines didn't tell the whole story, and Ryan knew too well that cutting off one head of a serpent rarely killed it. Life at the farmhouse with Rebecca and Zoe settled into a fragile rhythm. Mornings smelled of coffee and paint, afternoons carried the laughter of Zoe running across the fields, and evenings were filled with quiet conversations at the dinner table. To anyone else, it looked like a family finally healing. Yet Ryan felt the undercurrent of unease, the watchful silence between phone calls, the way Rebecca sometimes paused mid-sentence as if measuring how much truth she dared to share. Rebecca had thrown herself deeper into her legal work, determined to honor her father's memory. Castellanos was gone, but Meridian Industries, the company that had armed soldiers with defective body armor, still had powerful allies. Every day she sifted through old files and new leaks, convinced that the rot spread further than one man. Ryan admired her persistence, but it kept him awake at night. Each document she uncovered, each name she circled in red ink, was another doorway for danger to walk through. One evening, after Zoe had gone to bed, Ryan stood on the porch staring out at the dark horizon. The air smelled of rain, the kind that came heavy and fast across Iowa fields. Rebecca joined him, her cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. "You don't trust that it's over, do you?" she asked softly. Ryan shook his head. "Men like Castellanos don't work alone. Someone else signed the checks. Someone else kept the contracts alive. You cut off one arm, another one grows back." Rebecca's eyes reflected both weariness and resolve. "That's why I can't stop. My father died trying to uncover the truth, and Castellanos was only one piece of it. There are more names, more deals. If we don't see it through, then his sacrifice was wasted." Ryan didn't answer right away. He heard Zoe's laughter echo faintly from inside, the sound of crayons clattering onto a wooden table. That was his sacrifice, her safety, her innocence. He had built everything around protecting her, and every time Rebecca spoke of justice, he felt the walls of that safety tremble. The next morning, Zoe padded into the kitchen barefoot, her hair a wild halo from sleep. She plopped into a chair and asked, "Daddy, are we going to Romano's tonight?" It was her way of measuring normalcy, the ritual that reminded her the world was still steady. Ryan hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart, we'll see." Rebecca looked up from her files, her expression unreadable. Later, when Zoe ran outside to chase the neighbor's dog, Rebecca leaned closer. "She knows something's different," she whispered. Ryan nodded. "She's smarter than we give her credit for." "Then maybe it's time to tell her more," Rebecca pressed. "Not everything, but enough so she understands why things are heavier now." Ryan bristled. "She's 8. Her world should be crayons and school plays, not conspiracies and contractors." "But she already knows," Rebecca countered gently. "She knows her father's not just a plumber. She knows the name Rodriguez. She sees how people look at you when you walk into a room. Pretending otherwise doesn't protect her. It just leaves her confused." Ryan didn't reply. He thought about Zoe's question at Romano's months earlier, how her intuition had pierced through fear to see the truth. He wanted to shield her, but maybe Rebecca was right. Shielding wasn't the same as preparing. That night, as Ryan tucked Zoe into bed, she asked the question he had been dreading. "Daddy, why were those bad men after Miss Rebecca? Was it because of the soldiers like Captain Rodriguez?" The words hit him like a strike to the chest. He sat down on the edge of her bed, brushing hair from her forehead. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice steady but heavy, "sometimes there are people in the world who care more about money than about lives. Miss Rebecca is trying to stop them, just like Captain Rodriguez did." Zoe's eyes widened, solemn and searching. "And you're helping her, right? Because that's what heroes do." Ryan swallowed hard. To her it was simple. To him it was a labyrinth of risk and choices. "I'll always protect you first," he said carefully. But if you protect her too, Zoe insisted, then it's like Captain Rodriguez is still helping people. Her words, innocent yet piercing, stayed with him long after she drifted to sleep. He sat alone at the kitchen table, the dog tags cool in his palm, Rebecca's files spread out in front of him. Maybe Zoe was right. Maybe some battles couldn't be avoided. The next day, Rebecca received a letter without a return address. Inside was a single photograph, the three of them leaving Romano's weeks ago, Zoe skipping between them. On the back, a message scrawled in black ink. You stopped one man. The others are watching. Ryan stared at the photo, his jaw tightening. The serpent wasn't dead. It was coiled in the dark, waiting. The photograph changed everything. It wasn't just a threat. It was proof that their world was no longer private. Someone had followed them, studied them, waited until the right moment to remind them they were never truly safe. Ryan's first instinct was to pack their bags, drive until the map turned into endless roads, and disappear into the kind of obscurity only a man like him could manage. But Zoe was already too settled here. She had friends at school, an art room she adored, and the fragile beginnings of a life that felt normal. Uprooting her again would mean letting fear dictate every step. Rebecca watched him closely as he held the photograph, her fingers tracing the edge of the image like it was a wound. It means they're nervous, she whispered. If they had real power left, they wouldn't need to scare us with pictures. Ryan wasn't convinced. Or it means they're patient. Castellanos was the face, but there are others behind him. You start tugging at threads, and eventually someone decides pulling back isn't enough. They cut the hand that's pulling. For the first time, Rebecca looked shaken. Not afraid exactly, but the kind of realization that sinks deep into the bones. She had always known danger came with her pursuit of justice, but seeing Zoe's bright figure captured on film made the cost real. That evening, Zoe found the two of them sitting in silence at the kitchen table, the photo lying between them. She tilted her head, studying their faces, then picked it up with small hands. Why are you both sad? She asked. Ryan tried to soften his voice. It's nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. But Zoe's gaze stayed steady, unflinching. She had inherited that piercing clarity from her mother. It's about the bad men again, isn't it? They're still watching us. Rebecca reached over, placing her hand over Zoe's. Yes, they are. But your daddy is very strong and so am I, and we're not going to let them hurt you, ever. Zoe thought about that, then nodded slowly. Then we should make a plan, like the ones you make before we go camping. Ryan nearly laughed despite the weight in the room. His daughter's logic was so simple, but maybe she was right. Fear spread in silence, but planning meant action. Planning meant control, so they did. Over the next few days, Ryan shifted the farmhouse into what looked like a regular home but functioned like a fortress. Motion sensors were recalibrated, escape routes rehearsed, and safe rooms reinforced. Rebecca was startled at first by the precision in his methods, the way he turned windows into lines of defense, the way he measured timing for how long it would take to reach Zoe's room from any point in the house. But she didn't question it. This was who he was beneath the surface, a protector who had learned to live in shadows. Meanwhile, Rebecca's investigation uncovered new names. A senator who had approved funding for Meridian's contracts, a general who had retired comfortably into a board seat, men who had never seen combat but had profited from it. She scribbled notes late into the night, her determination burning like a second heartbeat. If I can tie them to the defective gear, if I can prove they buried reports of soldiers dying. She trailed off, exhausted but relentless. Ryan studied her across the table. You're making yourself a target. Rebecca met his eyes without flinching. So are you. It was the first time either of them had admitted it aloud. And strangely, the honesty didn't drive them further apart. It pulled them closer. One night, after Zoe had drifted to sleep, Ryan sat outside again, the stars heavy above him. Rebecca joined him quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They sat in silence until she finally spoke. Do you ever regret it? Walking away from the SEALs? Choosing this life? Ryan exhaled slowly. Every day, and not at all. I regret the parts I left unfinished, the promises I couldn't keep, but I don't regret choosing Zoe. She's the only reason I made it out of that world alive. Rebecca's voice softened. And now she's the reason you can't walk away again. Her words struck deeper than she knew. Ryan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Zoe wasn't just the reason he stayed alive, she was the reason he had to keep fighting, even when every instinct told him to hide. Because if the world remained broken, then her future was fragile. The next morning, Zoe bounced into the kitchen with a drawing clutched in her hand. She laid it on the table proudly. 3 stick figures holding hands. One was small, one was tall with brown hair, and one had long dark hair. Above them, she had written in crooked letters, family. Rebecca's throat tightened, her hand brushing the paper as though it might dissolve. Ryan stared at it, the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. This was what they were protecting. Not just truth, not just justice, but the fragile hope of a little girl who saw them not as allies thrown together by circumstance, but as something greater. That afternoon, Ryan drove into town for supplies. As he parked the truck, he noticed a black sedan idling too long at the corner. The driver's face was hidden behind sunglasses, the kind of stillness that screamed surveillance. When Ryan locked eyes with him, the sedan pulled away slowly, disappearing into the flow of traffic. Back at the farmhouse, he didn't tell Rebecca or Zoe what he'd seen. Not yet, but the serpent was moving again, circling closer, waiting for the right moment to strike. The black sedan was only the beginning. Within days, Ryan noticed small changes that most people would overlook. A truck parked too long outside the hardware store, a man pretending to read a newspaper near Zoe's school, a shadow in the mirror of the rear view when he drove home at night. Each time, the details were subtle, but to Ryan, they lit up like flares. He had lived too long in hostile territories to miss the signs of surveillance. They weren't just being watched, they were being measured. He tried to shield Zoe from it. He smiled at dinner, helped with her homework, laughed at her jokes, but she saw through him anyway. One night, as he tucked her in, she whispered, "Daddy, are we in danger again?" The innocence in her voice broke him. He kissed her forehead and said, "Not as long as I'm here." But the truth echoed differently in his chest. Rebecca saw it too. She noticed how he checked locks twice now, how his eyes scanned the horizon before stepping outside, how his shoulders never fully relaxed. Late one evening, she laid another file on the table and said quietly, "We can stop. We've done enough. Maybe it's time to walk away." Ryan shook his head, his jaw tightening. Walking away doesn't erase their power. It doesn't bring back the men who died, and it won't protect Zoe if they still see us as a threat. Rebecca studied him. "Then what are you willing to do?" The question lingered like smoke. The answer came 2 nights later. It was storming outside, thunder rolling over the fields when Zoe screamed from her room. Ryan burst through the door, weapon drawn, his heart pounding. A figure in black slipped through the window, rain slicking his mask. Ryan lunged, grappling with the intruder in silence, broken only by the crash of thunder. The fight was brutal and close, a tangle of fists and knives. By the time Rebecca rushed in, Ryan had pinned the man to the floor, his arm twisted unnaturally behind his back. "Who sent you?" Ryan hissed. The intruder said nothing, his eyes defiant even through the pain. But Ryan recognized the tattoos on his forearm. Mercenary, hired muscle, not random. This wasn't intimidation, it was escalation. They turned the man over to the sheriff's department, but Ryan knew better than to believe it was finished. Men like this didn't talk in small-town jails. Someone would post his bail, and he'd vanish before sunrise. That night, after Zoe finally fell asleep in Rebecca's arms, Ryan sat alone at the kitchen table, soaked in stormlight. The dog tags rested in his palm, cold and heavy. He remembered Rodriguez's words from years ago, "The fight finds you whether you're ready or not. What matters is who you're standing for when it does." Rebecca entered quietly, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You can't keep carrying this alone," she whispered. Ryan looked at her, and for the first time he allowed the vulnerability to show. "I can handle myself, but Zoe, if anything happens to her." His voice broke. Rebecca knelt beside him, her hand gripping his tightly. "That's why we fight smarter. Together. For her." Her words steadied him, not because the fear vanished, it never would, but because he finally understood what Rodriguez had meant. Strength wasn't just in fists or tactics, it was in refusing to face darkness alone. The next morning, Ryan called in favors from men he hadn't spoken to in years. Old teammates, contacts who lived in the gray spaces of loyalty and law. They responded with quiet understanding, no questions asked. He wasn't returning to the battlefield, but he was building a shield around his family, one forged from trust, memory, and the kind of brotherhood that never died. Zoe noticed the shift. She saw men she didn't know checking the perimeter, heard their boots on the porch. Instead of fear, she seemed reassured. "Daddy," she said one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch, "are these your friends?" Ryan smiled faintly. "The best kind. And they'll help protect Miss Rebecca too?" He nodded. "All of us, together." Zoe leaned against him, her small voice certain. "Then Captain Rodriguez would be proud." The words settled deep into him, like a balm on an old wound. He tightened his arm around her, silently agreeing. That night, Rebecca placed another photo on the table. This one wasn't a threat but a lead. A grainy image of a man stepping out of a government building, shaking hands with a Meridian executive. "He's the one," she said. "The connection between the company and the senators who funded them. If we bring him down, the rest collapses." Ryan studied the image, then looked at Zoe asleep on the couch, her art supplies scattered around her. The fight ahead would be dangerous, maybe more than anything they had faced so far. But for the first time, he felt clarity instead of conflict. This wasn't about revenge or even duty. It was about building a future where Zoe could grow up free of shadows. He looked at Rebecca, his voice calm but resolute.
Then we finish this. Not tomorrow, not next year. Now, the storm had passed, leaving the night strangely still. But Ryan knew it was only the eye. The true battle was yet to come, and this time, he wouldn't be standing alone. The storm had passed, but the echoes of that night lingered long after the rain dried from the fields. Romano's family restaurant still reserved their corner booth every Friday, but it wasn't just a table for 2 anymore, or even 3. It was a table claimed by something larger, by a family forged in fear, tested by justice, and bound together by love. Zoe still colored with her crayons while she ate, her drawings spreading across the table like pieces of her heart. But now her pictures told new stories. They no longer showed only seahorses and dolphins. They showed a tall man in an olive green shirt, a woman with dark hair standing beside him, and a little girl holding both their hands. Above them, in bright crooked letters, she had written one word again and again: family. Rebecca had learned the rhythm of their small-town lives. She cut pizza into perfect squares, laughed at Zoe's endless questions, and listened patiently to Ryan's quiet reflections on the porch at night. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of justice alone. And for the first time since his wife's passing, Ryan allowed himself to imagine that the life he was protecting wasn't just for Zoe, it was for himself too. The quiet plumber who once dismantled 3 attackers in 15 seconds still lived in Ryan Carter. That man would never disappear. But most days, Ryan was something far greater: a father, a partner, and a protector who had learned that the truest kind of strength was not in striking hardest, but in standing longest for the people you love. Captain Benjamin Rodriguez's dog tags still hung around Ryan's neck, but they no longer felt like the weight of a past he couldn't escape. They felt like a promise, one that stretched from the battlefield where a man gave his life, all the way to a quiet farmhouse in Iowa where his daughter and his protege now built something worth protecting. Zoe's laughter filled the farmhouse, and each sound was proof that some victories weren't measured in courtrooms or headlines, but in the warmth of a child's joy. Ryan realized that this was what Captain Rodriguez had died for, not just justice in the abstract, but the chance for a future. And yet, even in moments of peace, Ryan knew the story wasn't finished. The serpent hadn't been killed, only wounded. There were still powerful men in expensive suits, still contracts and secrets buried deep in files waiting to be unearthed. The letter, the photograph, the masked intruder, they were reminders that danger wasn't gone. It was watching, waiting, and it would return. But this time Ryan wouldn't be standing alone. Rebecca's courage burned as fiercely as her father's once had. Zoe's innocence gave him purpose, and the old brotherhood of men he once trusted had returned to his side. Together, they weren't just surviving the shadows, they were shining light into them. As Zoe lifted another drawing into the air, proudly showing them a picture of their family standing tall against a dark, faceless monster, Ryan felt something he hadn't in years: hope. This was what victory looked like. Not the silence after a fight, not the fall of an enemy, but the quiet strength of love, the resilience of family, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow could still be safe. Would you have believed a quiet small-town dad could still carry the weight of Navy SEAL secrets? Subscribe for more stories where ordinary fathers reveal extraordinary courage and families discover hope in the unlikeliest places.